So these slides are going to go over some of the key concepts from the Importance of Angles piece that you just read, and also I just want to provide you some extra examples and just put a little bit of in context. So in our poetry video, you're going to want to evoke a feeling as well as to have a beginning, middle, end to your video. So think about how the images that you select, because you're only using still images to evoke this feeling, how those images can help you evoke a feeling. The images that you select, the content in them, that can help you tell your feeling, get your feeling across, your emotion, your physical sensation. Also, how those images interact with each other, what you put next to what, the order that they go in. Do they crop in on a particular part of the image? Are you very close? Are you very far away? Do you move in closer? So the interaction between images in sequence. And think about the interaction between those images in sequence and your audio. Do you cut on a word? Do you wait and have a pause? How long is the space in between images and audio? Is there a specific rhythm that you're going for? That kind of a thing. So that's why I want us to think about the angles of the images that we choose, and when we bring it into iMovie or whichever app that you're using, thinking about the position within the frame. Again, do you want to zoom in on a specific part of the frame? How are you going to crop the image? That kind of a thing. So there are some kind of basic keys, guidelines we can think about when we are looking at images. So if we've got vertical orientations, think about, are you above the subject? Are you at the same level of the subject? Are you below? So that's what we mean about the orientation. Where are you? Where are you placing the camera, or where is the person who took the photo placing the camera in relationship to the subject? Most natural position is the camera height, the same height as your subject, but things from a lower angle or a higher angle are going to have a very specific feel to them. And again, then kind of think about, if you're thinking about the image plane as a 2D plane, horizontal. Are you in front, behind, 3/4 of a shot? And in some cases, things like landscapes, front and back really might not apply, but it's a good way to kind of start thinking about your images. So for example, in the video that I posted you guys saw, you can talk about where the camera is in relation to the ground. In that case, we have a lot of landscape photography there, but also, for example, there was the shot that had the statue in it. Well, we weren't face on the statue. It was like a 3/4 angle. You weren't fully to the side or in front. You were on an angle, sometimes called isometric. And are we always taking the photo with the horizon line level at a 180 degree or 90 degree angle to the piece? Do we tilt it at all? It's often called a Dutch angle if you're studying film theory. So if instead of having the horizon be kind of parallel to the actual horizon on a straight line, if you tilt anything, then we get this feeling of dis-ease, not disease, although that's a whole other thing. We want the horizon to be parallel. We want to be on level footing. We want to feel stable and secure with gravity doing what gravity's supposed to do. If you disrupt this at all with your image, then you're going to get this feeling of something being off. So again, you might want to rotate your image a little bit if the feeling you're going for is something scary or something that isn't right. And what can we see in the frame? And that's the field of view. What can the photographers see through the viewfinder? What can you see in that final image? And so again, when we're talking about using it in our video, are you showing the whole image? Are you selecting part of it? So you can kind of crop and change the field of view from what the original is. And if, say, you had a vertical image and you're then presenting it in a more horizontal aspect ratio, as we are when we're doing video, again, that's going to change what's in that field of view. So thinking about, is it a wide shot? Do we have a lot of stuff being seen, or is it very, very close in someone's face? And again, if you are using a shot that's originally vertical, when you then bring it into iMovie, and then you have it fit to fill the frame, you're going to only see a small portion. And sometimes that makes us suddenly feel really uncomfortable with the image because of how it's cropped or how close we are to the image itself. Because there are some psychological associations with how close we are, especially to things like faces. And so we can think about whether or not the images we choose align us with a subjective camera angle, something that makes us feel like we're in the scene, we're part of it, or if we're something like an observer. I would say that most of the shots that I selected for my piece had us be an observer. But you could also say that you felt like you were walking through the journey. So it depends, on the eye of the beholder a little bit. But think about the fact that the more embedded your viewer is in the image, the more they're going to feel like they have something at stake. There's going to be more of a reaction. An impartial, kind of neutral, third person kind of view of the world. And again, this is often what we see when we're further away from our subjects, when we are in a more wider shot, and there's more that we can see giving us context, versus if you're very close to something, we often feel more subjective. So are we doing a wide angle field of view? We see more of the scene. It tends to be more objective. There's often not that intimacy involved. We feel more like an audience. You can think about these as long shots, extreme long shots, and staging views. So I do want to just mention a little bit of film grammar because we're using it without really talking about it. So just to make it clear, in film grammar, we'll talk about different kinds of space, and this very much aligns with what we're talking about in the psychology of angles, where we've got impersonal space, so your extreme wide shots, your wide shots, things that feel objective. Communicative space, so places where you see two people, for example, and they're talking to each other. Personal space, one person filling the frame. And intimate, so if you've got an extreme close-up, you're right in someone's face. And you're almost moving from an objective to a subjective viewpoint the closer you get. And so we can equate these with shots. Establishing shots are impersonal. Wide shots where you can see, again, two people in a frame, it's communicative. A medium shot, often talk about like waist up, that's personal. Close-up and point of view are very intimate. So for those of you who are maybe used to film grammar, taking video production, those are kind of the ways in which they overlay back and forth. And if you take a look at the, this was available to you at the storyboards, there's some shot kind of discussion. And if you were, say, storyboarding, some things that people use and shortcuts that they use in the language, just so that you, if you ever see these, you understand what they mean. We're not going to need these in class, but I just want to make you aware of them. So like I said, I've brought in some examples from film theory books. I think sometimes it's useful to frame it in kind of a language we're all used to. We all watch movies, we all understand these kind of establishing shots where you can see the city behind people, you understand where they are, they give you context. And we can see that the architecture around the two people here is more dominant in the frame than the people themselves. And that would be an extreme wide shot. Or again, a vista where you could see the whole city, that's an extreme wide shot. Wide shot, we've got here, you've got the person, he doesn't fill the frame. Again, the background, the context, the surroundings takes up much more of the frame than the subject, the human subject. So again, idea of big picture can often talk about context. We can also have the idea of being a distant observer. So if you're wanting to talk about the world from a dispassionate, cold point of view, that's terrific. The grandeur of nature, the awe-inspiringness of nature, all these things lend themselves to wide view angles. Long shot rather than extreme long shot, a little bit more specific in terms of the scene. We're not talking about the vastness of Yosemite, but we're talking about maybe a campsite and the people who are in it. Again, it's still going to be rather objective because we're not really in the space with people. Staging is something that, again, we kind of use words that come from different things. So if you're from theater, you might know the idea of a staging in terms of, because it's kind of borrowed from that lexicon. So we might see a whole room. You almost think of it like the set that you see on a stage of a play. So that you have that context. You see everything around the person. It's not in with the subjects themselves. It's more objective. You're taking everything in. You're a fly on the wall. Then we're going to get a little bit closer. So medium shots, as I said, often talk about kind of like waist up. And sometimes we'll talk about shots where you got two people talking to each other. As you can see here, now we're a little bit more balanced in terms of our subject and our background. Medium close-up, again, we're stepping in closer still. So in this kind of medium point of view, it's somewhere between subjective and objective. So if you want to get a feeling like, again, you're you're evoking something specific. You're in the scene at this point. You're now another member of the group that's talking to each other. We've got human interaction and the focus is on the human. You're not necessarily involved in the conversation, but you're standing by the sidelines. You're watching a game. You're not seeing the game from the sky cam. You're on the sidelines. So that might be another way to kind of understand it. So we're involved as viewers. We do have a stake in what's going on, but we're not intimately acquainted with the various people. Two shots are medium shots. It's sometimes also called the American shot. It was used a lot in American movie making. And so there's lots of different ways you can frame a two shot. Same way that there are a million different ways two people can relate to each other. But think about who's kind of dominant. Think about who you're going to focus on. And again, it doesn't need to be people. It can, again, be objects. It can be nature. It can be things that we're seeing. But in that case, we are often kind of personifying, and again, we are projecting onto these things feelings, because again, we're trying to evoke some kind of feeling or emotion. And then you get closer. Close-ups tend to be faces, or again, a specific body part that you're wanting to kind of draw attention to. You're going to identify with whatever's in the frame at this point. Person, plant, animal, stone, whatever it is, we've now gone from objective to subjective. It's very hard to have a close-up of something and not have identification and subjectivity being involved. So once you do zoom in on that thing, your viewer is going to identify with it. So you want to be careful about what you choose, the elements that are in the frame. Think about things like color and texture and shapes when you are using things that are close-ups, especially if you are trying to evoke something that is more abstract. A lot of times we can use to great effect inanimate objects, but you want to be aware of the different things like color, again, things like texture. Is it smooth? Is it rough? Is it icy? Is it on fire? Is it hot? And things like color can play into that in terms of reds or blues. It's something warm looking or cool looking. You can play with things in terms of, again, like things like, is it a round stone? Is it a jagged stone? Angles are going to be hard angles, feel harder. They feel scarier. Smooth curves feel softer, feel more natural and welcoming. So make sure that you are very conscious if things are very much filling up the majority of your frame, what associations the viewer is going to bring to that. So in cinematography, if we're looking at humans, we think about a reaction shot because we're thinking about if we are going from a medium shot where two people, you're then looking at one person, well, why are you going to look at their face? They're reacting to what's just been said. We can have various variations, as you could see in some of the images that I showed you before. We've got medium close-ups as well as close-ups. So we've got different versions. We've got ones where you're focusing really intensely, more of extreme close-up on elements of someone's face, especially their eyes. And if you do draw attention to different parts of the body, again, remembering things like hands, there are different things that we associate with them as well. So we can think about inanimate objects, again, will project personification onto them. So thinking about those other sensations that are kind of portrayed through the visual. Extreme close-ups, be very conscious of the uncomfortableness at times that we get when we are that close to another person specifically. It's less of a problem with inanimate objects, but you can use an extreme close-up as a way to disarm your viewer or to make them feel uneasy, especially if you do have an extreme close-up on a part of a person, especially their face. You're kind of going into, as the person who talks about the psychology of angles, we've become a voyeur. We are at a level of closeness that is not natural, that you wouldn't have when you were speaking to someone. It is as if your face is pressed up against that of another person. And so there are very few cases in which this is something that feels natural. There are some. And so, for example, in romance stories, we will often use this, especially close-ups of the eyes and the lips. But be very conscious of what it's going to do for the viewer, because you can cross a line very quickly from that kind of loving angle to an almost obsessive, possessive, and negative connotations to it. It's a very fine line. So again, just kind of going back to the psychology of angles, are you on level with people? Are you above them? Are you below them? Are you eye to eye like a peer? If you're above them, again, that seems like you have control. If you're below them, a hero shot often is at a lower angle where you're looking up at the subject who is heroic. Eye level, this is a peer, you're on a level with them. And again, thinking about the subjectivity that can come through it. Portrait photographers might actually take a slightly higher, just above the eye level, in order to enlarge the eyes, because eyes are very much, the whole eyes are windows to your soul. Very true. We identify more with eyes than any other part of a human. And so if we can do things to accentuate the eyes, we often will. If you want to de-emphasize something, raise your camera so that everything underneath it appears smaller. If you want to emphasize something, the opposite is true. And again, the higher you are, the more objective you are. So again, this is all stuff that's in that reading, so I just want to make sure that I kind of hit on it, and then I'm going to move through the stuff that's in the reading more quickly and focus on the stuff that's kind of extra that I brought in. So for example, here, very high up, taken from the top of the Sears or Willis Tower, depending on when you visited. I believe when I visited that was actually the Sears Tower. Now it's the Willis Tower, looking down upon a statue in Chicago. And you can see this actually also flattened the space in between. I am blocks and blocks and blocks away from this. And the distance between the buildings and the sculpture is flattened as well. So keep that in mind, that when you are really zoomed in on something and you're very high, space tends to be compressed. So we get this bird's eye view. People seem insignificant, like they're ants. You feel a bit like you're a god. It can be disorienting and anxiety producing. So again, think about the context. Are you doing vertigo? In which case, makes perfect sense. Another example, in this case, again, the horizon is not at a parallel angle. This is again taken from the top of the Willis Tower, looking down upon a swimming pool that's on top of a building of a hotel in Chicago. And you can see the disorientation of the angles of what's up and what's down and how does it all kind of pull together. So again, you can use bird's eye view pieces as a way to make the viewer feel uncomfortable. Whereas if you're below the waist, you're going to have something where they're bigger, it feels very heroic or menacing or authoritarian. So you can play with these things and see what happens. Your viewer might feel weak, powerless, helpless, insecure, or they could be projecting power onto the person who you are photographing. It depends on the shot, obviously. So this is, again, things to keep in mind when you're looking at things. This is the way we could have this feeling of awe or wonderment, in the same way that we can bring into a idea of a nature landscape awe. And so again, horizontal versus vertical now, thinking about, are you in front, behind, to the side? Front, honest, non-deceptive, you're looking straight in someone's eyes. It's used much more in stills than in video. We find eye contact in video can, depending on the context, feel really weird and awkward, actually. We want to have the suspension of the disbelief. We want to have that fourth wall that you'll hear talked about when you talk about the idea of like writing a script and breaking the fourth wall. When the person looks directly at the camera, it instantly shatters it. It's the aside to the camera where you look directly out. If you're in a play and you talk to the audience, it feels awkward. We do get it in like sports commentary, but that's, again, you're talking directly to the viewer, and so it makes sense. Unless you're addressing the viewer, it feels weird to look straight at the camera. We do get in photography often because, again, you are kind of addressing the viewer. But pay attention to the eyes and what they're doing, because they often tell us an awful lot. It can be seen as threatening if people are, again, depending on the psychological, how they're holding their bodies. And again, if you're staring someone down, that's going to have a different feel to it. If you look point of view, so you're looking kind of from the eyes of somebody else, we'll use that sometimes in film, like over the shoulder, so you see what the person's seeing. That's less unnerving than looking directly into the camera. Oftentimes what you'll get if you're, say, setting up a shoot with a producer is they're going to stand directly to the right or the left of the camera, very close, but not directly in line, so that way you've got that slightly off look, so they're looking just to one side, and it is more comfortable for us as far as we're concerned. So this is a film grammar that goes to the same thing that you're hearing about in your psychology of angles. So again, make sure that, if there is, think about if there's kind of comfort between the headroom of a person, if they're looking into space, or if they're looking at the very edge of the frame. A point of view angle can be subjective or objective. It kind of depends on how you're positioned within the frame. If it feels like you're unseen and an unseen observer who's like maybe looking over the shoulder of someone who's several feet in front of you, it can feel voyeuristic. If you are directly behind the person, so like perhaps you only see the edge of their head and shoulder, it feels more like you're walking with them. A side angle feels, again, voyeuristic, like we've got an advantage over the subject. We can see them and they don't see us. And the further away you are, the more that's enhanced. The closer you are, the more it feels like, okay, you're coming up alongside them. And again, a rear angle can feel a bit like that point of view angle, but pulled back further. We can see where the person's walking to, where they're headed, and sometimes that can be interesting in terms of an emotional feeling, because it feels like maybe you're moving on. Here's an example. So again, thinking about what that does to the person. We're not seeing their eyes, we're not seeing their face, so we can use physical proximity to help, but we don't have that identification with the face and the eyes. Tilted angles, again, can feel a bit off. Dutch angles, which is actually a misnomer. It's Deutsch, just like it's Pennsylvania Deutsch. Those people are German, they are not Dutch, but that is how we mistake things. Tilted camera angles make us feel uneasy, like we showed you a few slides ago. It can be overused, so use it sparingly. We're used to normal and wide angles, but just I want to mention about zoom, telephoto, and fisheye lens, and the fact that we can have things be blurrier or more in focus, and that can affect it. So just being aware that in some images, space is going to look more compressed because of the different lenses that they use. In some cases, things look like they're further away than they actually are. Again, you can read the text in these slides, but just to give you some ideas, the idea is that we can exaggerate the heights of things based on the way, like the lenses that people use. And we can see certain things that are everything in focus, or at times, in this case, we can see we got a short length, and sometimes things are more in focus or less in focus as well, and that's going to have us change how we feel about the space around it. Here we can see things are blurry behind her. We can't make out the details in the background. Same shot, two different lenses. So just to be aware that you're going to get a different feeling from this shot than this shot. So having a sense of what you're looking for when you're selecting the images. So look at those examples and keep those things in mind. And I hope that helps you make your shot selection for your poems.